All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We are really excited to talk about a very hot topic, that being GEO. So if you're in the communication space, which I'd imagine most attendees are, you've undoubtedly heard and definitely been thinking a lot about GEO. It seems like just overnight, audiences everywhere started turning to AI engines, whether it's Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, to source their information. And of course, this is having a huge impact on how brands think about, not only whether they show up, but how they show up, and making sure that they are showing up prominently and favorably across all AI engines. So it's a lot to think about, and certainly requires a shift in how we think about PR and communications more broadly. So we're very excited to welcome Taylor Childs, who's joining us today from Evertune, a leading GEO platform. So Taylor's here to help us make sense of all the GEO madness, and help us guide toward a more modern communications approach. So welcome, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that introduction and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Before we dive in, if you want to just give a quick introduction to Evertune and what you do there, I think that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. So Evertune plays in the GEO or Generative Engine Optimization space, oftentimes referred to as AEO or AI search, AI discoverability, whatever the term of the week
Whatever the
is.
term of the day. Yeah.
Choose your own adventure. But we play in the GEO space, and at the highest level, what we help brands do is understand and then optimize how they show up within all these various LLMs that are just gaining mass adoption, and brands are being found in a whole new way. And we're here to help support brands and agencies on that journey.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, we're very excited to have you joining us. So I guess to start, well, let's start with the very basics, just for folks who might be a little bit newer to GEO or AEO or whatever the term is, as you pointed out, has a lot of different names. How do you typically define GEO? Like, what is it? How should brands be thinking about it? And how is it different than SEO?
Yeah, it's a great question. Perfect kicking off point. I think really at its simplest form, we think of it as just simply how do you show up as a brand? How do you show up in the models today? What do the models think about your brand when prompted directly about your company or business? And how likely are the models to recommend you when someone's asking a more general category type prompt?
Yeah.
So there's the practice of understanding how you show up. And then brands, of course, want to optimize and improve their visibility. So that's a big part of GEO as well.
Great. And you work with a lot of professionals on their GEO strategy. Out of curiosity, like who are you working with most often? Because it's certainly something that we as comms professionals are paying attention to. And often the folks that we're working with are um, you know chief communications officers or VPs of comms, but I've also seen it being owned by demand teams as business development functions. Like, what is that mix in terms of who owns GEO most typically?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And one of the most interesting learnings I've had since moving into this role. My background is I've always been in the digital marketing space. I spent a majority of my career in programmatic or ad tech, working with brands and agencies. And for the last 15 years or so in the programmatic realm, every agency had a programmatic practice. There was a very clear
Mm,
team that owned that space. And then as programmatic evolved, more brands started to get interested in the space, wanting to have more insight into who the partners they were working with,
yep.
ownership of contracts. But there was a very clear delineation of who sort of owned that space. What I found fascinating since coming to Evertune is how because of the way the models learn, they learn from essentially anywhere they can get their hands on content from across the internet, which means so many marketing functions have a hand in
Yes.
how a brand could be affected by how they show up. So that could be everything from the usual suspects that we hear a lot about, right? The social teams that are working with Reddit or YouTube. There's the Wikipedias of the world that are influencing the models, but earned media plays a huge role here as
Yep.
well. Affiliate plays a pretty significant role. So there's a number of, and of course, a brand's owned content as well. So there's a number of different touch points that inform how the models learn and how they're likely to answer. So therefore, there's a number of marketing functions that have a hand here. So that's what's
Yep.
been really fascinating. It doesn't always fit into a perfect box. Every brand
Yeah.
knows that they need and want to solve for this space. Uh, and then it's a matter of identifying who are the right folks internally. So we typically see a number of those teams that we just mentioned being involved. But very often, marketing leaders
Yeah.
are very invested in this space because they know it touches so many of the functions that fall into their remit.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it underscores the need for certainly integrated communications and also integrated marketing, just seeing it as it all kind of comes together so hand in hand. So you just touched on my next question, briefly in explaining that, but can you talk a little bit more about, the information channels that are feeding the AI engines that ultimately shape the responses that, I, as a ChatGPT user, might be getting when I go to ask a question? Like, so it sounds like it's a mix of earned, owned, user-generated content. But what is kind of the balance between those channels, and how should comms professionals and marketers be thinking about that mix as they look to kind of influence those channels?
Yeah, it's really interesting because we see in our research that even month to month, these trends can vary. Sometimes
Yeah.
individual models will increase or decrease the value they're putting on certain sources. Certainly, the ones you hear about the most, the couple that we mentioned before, the Reddits of the world, the Wikipedias, the LinkedIns, and the YouTubes, those play a really significant role. But what we found in working across numerous verticals and just looking platform wide of insights that we've pulled, we see there's really a significant long tail in terms of overall citations and
Mm.
the category that these citations fall into. So outside of the top 20 sites, which would be those sort of usual suspects that
Reddits,
we
you
just
mean Reddit's,
yeah.
YouTube's? Yep. Okay.
Exactly. There is a significant long tail, and to your question around for how comms professionals are thinking about this, we see that about 30% of overall domains that are cited are earned media publications.
Mm.
So opportunities for the PR teams of the world and the editorial teams.
Yes.
Uh, the, the models are very hungry for content. So the usual suspects do play a big role, but the models want to get their hands on authoritative, trusted content. So
Yep.
we really do see a big role for the comms piece here.
Love to hear that as a comms person and advocate for traditional media. I guess a follow on to that, one question that came up with a client yesterday was around, the impact that paywalls have on uh, AI engine crawlability, essentially. So, like, if, for instance, the Wall Street Journal has paywalled content, how does that impact, what the AI engine is ultimately able to scrape? So, presumably, they can't scrape that content, at least not today, correct?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there's something called a robots.txt file, which every publisher can control their own robots.txt file, and that essentially says which crawlers they allow or don't allow. So yes, in theory, anything behind a paywall, it's likely that they would not want the crawlers to be accessing.
Yep.
I won't speak to how the models approach that. That's for them to answer. But
Yep.
what is interesting about this space is that the model makers, so the OpenAIs of the world, they go out and they strike content deals with partnerships with these
Mm.
content distributors and content
Yep.
creators. So paid partnerships with the Wall Street Journal or a New York Times to get access to that content. So if you're a brand thinking about how you want to potentially influence how you show up within the models, if you want to optimize for your visibility on ChatGPT, let's say, understanding which publishers they actually pay for
Yeah.
access to content for, that could be a really good place to start. Because if uh,
Yep.
almost common sense wise, if the models are or if the model makers are paying for access to that content, it's very likely that they want to use that in terms of their training data and how they update their models.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So I guess That hits on another question that I had in terms of, you know, each AI model has kind of a different way of crawling information from across the web, which I don't know that everyone totally realizes right out of the gates. Can you talk a little bit about like how a chat versus a Gemini versus a Claude versus a DeepSeek sources information? And again, I realize there's a lot of nuance to that, so you don't have to go super in the weeds, but would love just to understand like fundamentally what is different between all of their crawling strategies and how might that impact the brands that again want to influence them.
Yeah. Yes, a great question. So again, the models are just across the board, and all of the models starving for information and content that they can get access to. They want to get their hands on as much as possible so they can decide what they want to learn and train from. Various model makers have access to different types of content. So Google within the Gemini suite, they're very likely to see a bias towards YouTube because it's a Google-owned
Mm,
property. Where
that makes sense.
a Microsoft Copilot, you're likely to see probably a bias towards LinkedIn as content that they own, and then that paid partnerships piece I mentioned as well plays a role here.
Yep.
So
Yep.
partnerships that OpenAI goes out and strikes with a New York Times or a Wall Street Journal, et cetera. So they all want to get their hands on as much content as possible. The content creators, the publishers, do have some control over what they allow and don't allow. And from a content creator perspective, if you're going out and creating this highly trusted, authoritative content, you certainly would like the model makers to pay you for access to that
Mm,
content. So there's a very long tail. The internet is a big, vast, expansive
yes.
place. So the models are accessing a lot of that. But when
Interesting.
you look at some individual sources, there's just different routes to whether it's owned by a model maker like a YouTube or a paid partnership like the
Yep.
AI and others have gone out and done.
That's great. Okay. I want to circle back to that because I think you're hitting on some really important things in terms of owned and earned strategies. But before we dive in a little bit deeper there, can you talk a little bit about kind of the common signals? So, across all channels, whether you're owned, earned, user generated, et cetera, what are kind of the common signals that most influence discoverability and credibility? Is it domain authority? Is it the way that the content is structured? Is it kind of like when it was most recently updated? I know all of those things play some role in discoverability, but would love to just hear your expert take on, again, what is that balance um, in terms of each of their roles?
Yeah, you're totally right in that all of them will play a role here. So we do want to be focused on each of those elements. I think a domain authority is really interesting because if you're looking at a list of if you have a list of domains or publishers in front of you that you're thinking about partnership with, domain
Yep.
authority can be a helpful way to understand how you may want to prioritize thinking about
Yep.
those partnerships. But what's great about this GEO landscape we now all have access to is we can actually use these insights from a platform like Evertune to help us understand where we should be focusing or where the brand should be focusing their
Yep.
efforts. So, an example, if you were to pull a category report or look within a specific category that your brand really focused in, you can understand the actual source and citation information where the models are saying that it's almost like writing a high school paper where you cite your
Yeah.
sources and say, hey, this is where I learned this from, this is where I learned this from. And then we can help brands understand that. And as you look at that with really significant volume, you can understand the sources and citations that are most influencing or most influential to each of these models. So if you know you have a visibility gap on ChatGPT, for example, you want to think about, okay, where are the sources that ChatGPT is learning from for this category? And that's really
Yep.
where I want to go ahead and start with focusing my efforts because the models are already, or that model's already valuing that content. How can I get my brand into that conversation?
Right. Okay. That makes sense. I think before a brand uses a platform like Evertune, say they haven't done that initial audit, which I want to talk about, that auditing phase in a minute. Are there general best practices in terms of, okay, this outlet has a domain authority of 50, yay or nay, or, what are some of the best practices in terms of we know we need to generate more owned content in general, this is the format that it should take, and this is how often we should be producing it. Are there kind of best practices around that, or is it, does it change so quickly that, it's best to just kind of keep reporting and auditing and then applying those lessons?
Yeah, if you haven't don't have access to those insights yet, then yeah, I think domain authority is a great way to kick off and to start. Of course, when you do have access to the insights, then the models are actually telling you where they're learning from. But I think you also brought up a good point around owned media as well. So if we know that there's all these different areas that can and do influence how the models get trained and educated and are likely to respond, uh, typically earned for most brands is one of the more lower hanging fruits and
Yep.
typically a quicker turnaround opportunity for either refreshing content or creating new content. So there's
Yep.
different things you can do in terms of structuring your content. Uh, the models like it when life is easy for them. They like when things are bulleted and structured and put into lists. It's probably one of the reasons that they really value affiliate content as well, because those can often be articles that are best of or top 10. So that's very easy for the
Hmm.
models to absorb that information. So
So by
structuring,
affiliate content, you mean like partner generated content or okay. I just want to make sure we're clear on what that means.
yeah, great clarification. Yeah, the paid affiliate content with various publishers around the web.
Yes. Okay. Great.
And the last piece I would add is with your web for the earned media piece, or excuse me, for the owned media piece for your own website, steps you can take include looking at that robots.txt file that I mentioned before. So working with your web team to just ensure that if you are going out and creating this content and placing it on your blog or different areas
Yep.
on your site, ensuring that as long as you want the crawlers to have access to it, ensuring that you're not blocking them. We actually see quite a bit that brands will go out and create new content and say, hey, I've got these new articles and blogs going up on my site. Why is it not getting picked up by the models? And then when we look sort of behind the curtain, we at the robots.txt file, we understand that their web team had maybe inadvertently or historically had been blocking ChatGPT or Gemini's crawlers. So therefore, if the
Oh,
models can't get access
interesting.
to it, you could make unlimited content, but you need to make sure the models have the ability to learn from it if you want them to have that access.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, that would be a problem if you were getting blocked. Um, so let's talk a little bit about kind of starting. So, at this point, the comms teams and the marketers have kind of the best practices, lay of the land. They know what they need to do, and it starts presumably with that kind of initial audit with a tool like Evertune to understand, where are we performing well, where there may be gaps in our strategy in terms of how we're showing up, when it comes to category level prompts or even prompts about our own brand. So I know that we at V2 did our own audit of our firm and how we're showing up, and it was really eye-opening in terms of what's working well, what's maybe where is there room for opportunity. But can you talk a little bit about, with Evertune and presumably with a lot of your peer tools, there's so much that you can learn in terms of how you're showing up across these AI engines. Um, what are the metrics that you think are the most important to assess first? Like I know Evertune um, has kind of like a word association score and then the brand AI score, sentiment. Like, can you talk a little bit about all of that and like what is probably most important for brands to pay attention to with the initial audit in terms of, again, understanding kind of where they are today and what are the most immediate steps to improve. And we can talk about, if you have 90 days, what do you do first? But
Right.
but before we get to that step, what are the metrics that you would recommend paying the most attention to?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a number. So
Yeah.
and I think the way you broke it down is a good way to think about it. looking from a branded perspective versus a category or a non-branded
Yep.
perspective. So, and just to zoom out before we even get to that piece is with GEO, really what we're looking to help brands understand or looking to accomplish is really to understand how the models think and how they're likely
Yep.
to respond and why they're likely to respond. So oftentimes a brand, as you just said, some of these results or insights can be eye-opening. Sometimes a brand will have a different perception or a different understanding of their own market research that may look different than what they see in the insights they get from a GEO platform. And a really important clarification here is what a GEO platform is helping you do is understand how the models think. And that may be different, right? As you said, they're all trained on different they have different algorithms. They're trained in different ways, different access to content information. But in this new world of discoverability and in this essentially now collapsed decision-making funnel where an individual user can make a purchase decision or make any sort of decision from start to finish without actually ever leaving ChatGPT or Gemini, et cetera, uh, that visibility piece and whether you are recommended or not is crucial to just
Yeah.
overall brand health. So certainly the name to come back to your question, certainly the overall name of the game is everyone, of course, wants to be recommended 100% of the time and
Yeah.
recommended in that first position every
Yep.
time. But I think the way you're thinking about it makes a lot of sense. We have to start somewhere. We have to root in that sort of
Yes.
initial audit. So let's take those two buckets. So on the branded side, it's very helpful to understand how the models think about you when someone asks about your brand currently. So as an agency, the use case may be you're out participating in a pitch, and the brand that you're pitching is looking directly going to the models to look you up and say, hey, what is V2 known for? What are their strengths, et cetera. So you want to ensure that the models are providing really accurate and relevant information about your brand. Uh, so
Yep.
the types of metrics you can get in that case are things like sentiment analysis and word association, as you mentioned. So word
Yep.
association will be what are the phrases and keywords that are most commonly associated? What are the models saying about you when someone asks directly about your brand? So understanding
Yep.
what those words that are associated with your brand, that's a really good starting point. And then you can add sentiment analysis on top of that. So that's understanding were those keywords in a positive or a negative light?
Yep.
And that, of course, can mean two very, very different things. And then from there, you want to understand where the models learned from when they
Yep.
provided that sentiment analysis and that word cloud. And that'll always be the root. Understanding where the models learn from will always be the root. And then on the non-branded side, so now when someone, let's use the same example, a brand who's looking to partner with a new agency, they may start broader and higher up in the decision-making funnel and say something like, who are the best PR comms agencies to work with? And in that
Right.
case, of course, to our previous point, V2, every brand wants to be mentioned 100% of the time in first position. So those
Yep.
metrics look more like what's your overall visibility? What's your average position? Like what percentage of the time is your brand being mentioned? In what position? So the average position
Yep.
that you're being mentioned. So that's certainly the ultimate goal that everybody wants to get to. But to achieve that, there's shorter term metrics and uh, data points that we can look at. And we just talked about where the models learn from. We know where the models learn from based on the citations that they provide. So now if we're connecting a lot of the dots we've talked about here, uh, when we are going out and creating new content or updating content on our site or with via PR or affiliate or whatever route we're going to create this new content, we want to track how quickly is that getting cited by the models and how quickly and how often is it getting picked up. So
Yep.
citations can be a really good sort of a quicker win to track
Yep.
on the path to our ultimate goal of course, aiming to increase our visibility.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. So I guess bringing it all together, and you've hit on, I think, a lot of how you answer this question, but you have, say you're under pressure to, you have your audit, you understand like, oof, I have a lot of work to do to improve my GEO positioning. And maybe you don't, but I think there's always going to be room for improvement. Um, and you have 90 days to do it. You're getting pressure from the leadership to improve the score. What are the first things that you can do? And I guess it starts with what you had said earlier around own media is where you have the most control because, of course, that just comes from you. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you might then augment that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Uh, and I would actually say the first thing you should do in that instance is make sure you have a conversation with your leadership and properly
Yeah.
set expectations,
Yes.
because I think that 90 days is actually a great number that you use as an example, because we find a lot of brands come to us with that exact question.
Yep.
And that expectation setting is crucially important. The reason for that is we've been doing this for quite a while. We know, and we have case studies, we've seen the models are movable by creating content, looking in the right areas, understanding the insights, and creating the right content, getting it put in the right places. We have seen brand after brand after brand be able to increase their visibility, their likelihood to get cited by the models. That does not happen overnight. The GEO space is a crowded space. There's many players. I certainly believe in our methodology on the Evertune side. I would just caution anyone listening that there is no magic pill here, magic
Yep.
beans that will just move you into the number one position overnight or within a week.
Right.
Uh, these models are trained on an immense amount of data. There's verification layers. There's a lot that goes into it. So that is what I would just say initially. Proper
Yeah.
expectation setting. We want to move the models. If you tell your leadership that you're going to move the model in a month and you're going to be number one in a month, you might be setting yourself up for a
Yeah.
little bit of pain.
I think that's such a good point. I mean, is 90 days too soon? Like, how long do you feel like it takes? And then I realize we're talking about hypothetical metrics for hypothetical brands, but on average, is 90 days realistic? Does it take, quarters, years? Like, what do you think is needed to drive like material improvement in terms of like a
Yeah,
time perspective? And I also realize, so much of it is how much content are you producing, but
exactly. There's a number of factors, and it'll vary by vertical as well. If you're trying to
yeah.
move the needle in financial services, where you're competing against a bunch of legacy banks that have existed for 100 plus years, right? The models have a lot of historical information to go off of from that. For
Interesting.
more recent, newer categories, GEO is actually a good example. It's a more relatively new category that's only been
Yep.
around for a couple of years. So uh, we'll often see that those categories that don't have as much legacy history to them,
Yep.
that new content can actually move the models more quickly. So that's
Sense.
an important piece to take into account. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. So it just kind of depends largely on the industry as well as the net new content you're able to produce and secure.
Yeah, the content piece is key, and really a brand's entire content calendar comes into play here. We touched on all those areas
Yep.
that influence the models. Another really fascinating one, at least for me, I thought was really interesting was uh, I initially would hear a lot about influencers and think, oh, I can't really see how are the models training off of influencer content. But if a brand
Yep.
works with influencers and the influencers are posting their content to YouTube, the models train off of the transcripts on YouTube.
Yeah.
So having the influencer partners that are saying that messaging that a brand wants out there, that can actually help them get picked up by the model. So it's just so
Yep.
fascinating
Yep.
how almost every element of the marketing org really can play a role one way or another in GEO and how likely your brand is overall to get picked up.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of questions that have just like emerged, like more tactical questions, but have you seen a lot of brands kind of as a result of this initial auditing process, create their own YouTube channels or, post more like Q&A or FAQ type content on their site, just knowing like those are kind of more, I don't want to say quick wins, but kind of quick wins to driving AI discoverability.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think all those areas we talked about. And I think typically to go back to it, the owned media channels are just typically the lowest hanging fruit because
Yep.
often a brand just has the most control in that area. Sometimes at
Yep.
much larger organizations, there can be more steps to that approval process. But
Yep.
uh, we've seen brands that have told us, "Oh, we have a blog, we haven't updated it in 10 years, but we're going to start now." And they revive that and they start bringing up or creating and refreshing content for that. So or YouTube, to your example. Uh,
Yep.
and that influencer piece I thought was really interesting. So yeah,
Yeah.
there are a number of ways to achieve it, but I think really what we're saying here is the whole key to this is to get started, right? Is at a certain point is the insights are great. The insights are incredibly helpful. They create that foundation for you, but then it's the action steps that you
Yeah.
take off of it that are really what move the needle for a brand.
That's great. In terms of cadence, and again, I realize that there's a lot of gray area with this question, but is there a cadence you would recommend in terms of best practices for how often brands are pushing out content across their blog, across their social channels, across their YouTube or podcasts, if they have those types of channels? Like, is there best practice there, or does it really just vary based on, your business, your competitive set, your industry?
Yeah, probably one of the top three questions I get
Yeah,
in just day-to-day conversations. And it's another one where there's not a silver bullet for that answer,
right.
but consistency is certainly the name of the game. So
Yep,
hey, let's do 10 blog posts on Monday and then hey, we should be good. Uh, the models are incredible technology. The way that they can crawl and access information at such an incredible speed, uh, it means that your consistency is going to be really important. So whatever it is that content calendar that you commit to is or that you create, you certainly want to commit to that and ensure that you're iterating it as you go. Because then as you continue to
yep,
look at the insights, you can see how often is that content getting cited. You may see certain individual topic areas that you're focusing on getting picked up more quickly by the models. Maybe you want to
yep,
lean in more there. So the insights just continue to help you with that
yep,
iteration. And I think the point you made around looking at the competitive set as well, understanding how often their content is getting cited
yes,
will give
right.
you a really good indication of do we need to throttle up maybe in some of these areas?
Yep,
Because if we're thinking as a business that we need to solve for this, it's pretty likely our competitors are thinking that they want to solve for
100%.
the same problem.
Yep, that makes total sense. And then I guess going beyond your owned communication strategy, um, what should brands be thinking about as it relates to their earned media strategy, especially, once they have the insights that they can get from a tool like Evertune? Like how are you seeing brands use the information from your platform to tweak and adapt and revise the way that they approach earned communications?
Yeah, earned plays such a important role in all this. I think the common line that you hear just in this space generally is that the models love trusted, authoritative sources. If you really
Yep,
look at some like stats behind that, what we've seen is that if you take those top 20 sites, those ones that we touched on earlier, and by the way, within the top 20, there's players like Forbes, TechRadar,
yep,
Yahoo, et cetera. So those earned
yep,
media opportunities exist in those top 20. But
yep.
the top 20, in terms of all citations we've seen across every report ever run on our platform, the top 20 only make up about 12% of total citations. So that
Interesting.
long tail we talked about before, and I mentioned that. So what that means is that there's 88% of what's educating the models exists in that quote unquote long tail. But those are still very
Yes.
premium publishers that
Yep.
so they play a really important role here.
Yep.
And so and again, I would just tie it back to when you see OpenAI and these other companies go out and make paid partnerships. I think most of the LLMs have a paid partnership with Reddit. Beyond that, it's the New York Times is in the Wall Street Journals of the world, the Tech Radars, et cetera. These
Yep.
premium publications where earned media is a brand's route to getting to being able to get placed there. So it
Yeah.
just plays such a crucial role. And I think with a very big topic within general AI is around trust from a
Yes.
consumer lens. So certainly, I think everyone's at least outward statements, and I think as consumers, all our desires that the models will be valuing that type of trusted journalism because
Yep.
if you think about the way, at least I'll speak for myself, the way I interact with these models, it's having a direct influence on decisions I make in my life and how I approach them. So
Totally.
you want that to be coming from uh, these trusted, authoritative sources,
Reputable.
and the models are clearly valuing that based on the partnerships we've all seen them publicly make to get paid
Yes.
access to that information.
Yes. Are there common mistakes you see brands making when they're trying to improve AI visibility? Like, is there anything that like a lot of brands are doing today that you're like, this is totally missing the mark?
Yeah, I think a fun word in the space is AI slop. I
Yes.
think
Yeah, we were just talking about that the other day.
Yeah. So the name of the game is content. At the highest level, that truly to re-educate the models, they do have to have access to content.
Yep.
Uh, if you just word vomit a bunch of things onto a page and do that 100 times a day, and it doesn't really say anything or provide any new
Yes.
information, that you might see a short-term spike in citations, but you're not seeing that move the training, the foundational data of the models. So being really thoughtful, still we want to create content and get it in the right areas, but it's being thoughtful about the content that you
Yes.
create. So understanding, so that's where the insights again can really they inform the content that we should be creating. So what are the gaps we have now? And not just are we being recommended as a brand or are we not being recommended? But what are the
Yep.
attributes about a category that are really important to the model? So in our platform, we call that consumer preferences. So let's say it was uh, a brand that played in the CRM software space. They, of course, want to understand when somebody searches for CRM software, are we being recommended? Are we not being recommended? But in order to influence the content that that brand should make, we want to understand what attributes about CRM software do the models value. So you then can prompt the models and ask them those types of questions and understand, okay, the models think that ease of use, onboarding timelines, price points, et cetera, are the most important attributes in this category. Those then become very clear signal for a brand of we want to go create content around ease of use of our platform.
Yep.
Not just a bunch of
Yep.
words about how we're a CRM platform, but really hone in on what are those specific areas that the models think are important to consumers. And that really guides you on the being really specific about the type of content you should be creating.
Mm, that's very interesting because I guess a more kind of meta question I have is, so if the AI models are kind of influencing content strategies, like how do we as a society, not just as a like an individual brand, like make sure that they're searching for the right things and steering the conversations forward? I think it also kind of ties back to the continual need to create differentiated content in a way, and content that's modern and kind of pushing the boundaries of what the current conversation is today and also what everyone else is saying. So I think it's the balance of meeting people where they are and meeting the AI models where they are, but also producing content that advances not just consumer understanding, but the AI models that are influencing it, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. It's very
no,
like theoretical woo-woo, but just
it really is. It's fascinating how it all sort of comes together. And I
yeah,
think you're totally right. There are things that every business does that makes them unique and makes them stand out. And if there's so talking about those unique characteristics or traits or offerings of your business, or it could be maybe on the research side.
yep,
Businesses, every business in the world has access to of course, all the data that they have as a business. There's unique learnings that they can get from that
yep,
and using that to create content to say, hey, we're seeing X% doing this action. If
yeah,
you're the one talking about that, that's new, that's fresh. That's not other people aren't saying that, they're not just hitting that AI slot button and
right,
creating the same type of rinse and repeat content. That's where you really have big opportunity to put yourself in the conversation of being an authoritative, trusted source.
Yes, exactly. Great. I have a few more questions and then we'll turn it over to audience Q&A. In terms of measurement, what are the most, first of all, how often should brands be measuring, their GEO positioning and performance?
Yeah, I think it depends on the category that you're in and how uh, actionable or excuse me, the amount of content, fresh content that you're creating that you may want to be tracking.
Yep.
We typically see brands refreshing their reports every month. It goes back to we know the models are movable, but that these things take time. So you want to
Yep.
get the insights, use it as a map, think about your content strategy, go out and execute against that. Then when you refresh your report, you check the citation information. You can understand, did the new content I created or the refreshed content get cited by the models? Did it get picked up? If yes, okay, how often? Where do we sort of accelerate? Are we seeing any changes in visibility? There are some brands who uh, really want to see daily. And again, we're not
Wow.
seeing
Okay.
big spikes day to day. We do a practice called prompting at scale because the
Yeah.
models are probabilistic, which means every time we ask them a question, even if it's worded exactly the same, it's going to give us a different answer. It's going to word it differently, and it's going to likely, in a lot of cases, give different brand or product recommendations.
Yep.
So to run a set of insights in our platform, we're asking an incredible volume of tens of thousands of individual questions going to the models that then you get aggregated in your insights. So if you did that every day, you're not likely to see significant spikes. So you really,
Right.
to what we talked about before, it's all about it's a long game. When we talked about the
Yeah.
90 days, like within 90 days, you're very likely to see citations and you get a lot of good signal on new content you're creating and citations being picked up and start to see is your visibility changing. But
Yep.
within 90 days, the models haven't even released a new base model yet. They typically do that
Mm.
maybe twice a year. So the long game is brands want to be recommended by the base foundational model as
Yep.
well as when a ChatGPT or a Gemini goes out and does a real-time search. So
Yep.
but probably a long answer to your question, but
No, this is
there is
great. This
that
is
long.
exactly what I was hoping you would get at.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to reporting, um, I'm curious if you've heard from, all the brands that you're talking to, like what are the metrics that especially like the C-suite care most about? Um, we talked about setting expectations with the C-suite, but then presumably they're going to want to see that, spike in visibility over time. What are the best metrics to demonstrate that?
Yeah, so AI visibility, everyone calls it something a little bit different, but overall, it's just do you show up in the
Yeah,
prompt response? That's the golden goose here.
name of the
That's
game.
what
Yep.
every brand wants to achieve. There's
Yep.
some other signal along the way, like citations, and then auditing of your own site and thinking about or understanding. We call it bot analytics. That could be which bots are actually coming to your site. So is ChatGPT coming to your site and picking up your content? So there's other signal that we can look at.
Yep.
Ultimately, what every brand wants to achieve is the highest AI visibility possible. And the
Yep.
real world example of that is the executive director on the board. They want to go on ChatGPT on their phone, type in a prompt, and they want to see their business pop up first.
Right.
So
Yes.
I would just also uh, it goes back to that probabilistic nature of the
Yep.
models. Uh,
Yep.
you depending on the brand and the category that you're in, the model's going to answer differently each time.
Yep.
So that volume is really, really important to make sure you're asking the questions numerous times to each model. But
Yep.
yeah, to directly answer your question, what everybody's looking to achieve here is AI visibility and the highest frequency, what percentage of the time are you being recommended, and the highest ranking order. If there's a list of recommendations, are you number one or are you number five?
Yes. That's great. We have a few questions in the Q&A portal, and those tuning in, definitely feel free to add any questions that you have now. But one of the ones that we've already gotten is if YouTube is being crawled, is there any evidence that Spotify is being crawled as well? Wondering for brands that have podcasts.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I personally have not seen Spotify show up in any of the site analytics that
Yep.
of for any brands that I've partnered with. But that is a really interesting question. I think what is important on the YouTube side is that the models aren't actually watching the video and listening to the audio. They are picking up the
Transcript.
transcript of
Yeah.
the video. And just my personal knowledge of Spotify, I'm not sure if a transcript of a podcast exists. If it did, that is where the models would
Yep.
pick it up, though. So really interesting question, and I imagine something Spotify is probably thinking about because that's probably an area that they see as potentially a partnership opportunity for them and the LLMs.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have seen with podcasts like more Q&A when you kind of click on the about, but I not full transcript. So that is something that'll be interesting to watch. Another audience question, are there industries that are more at risk of losing visibility in AI search than others?
I think that one goes back to what we talked about, the ability to move the models
Yeah.
in that some of the more established industries, a healthcare, FinServ, those can take more time.
Yep.
And those are often more regulated industries as well. So the type of content that you can create and the volume at which you can create it. There's other industries, I'll just B2B tech. B2B tech has much less of that type of regulation and that brands need to think about. So they could create content much more quickly and address some
Yes.
different areas we talked about. So I'm
Huge opportunity for our clients.
exactly.
Yeah, great. Another question is, any advice on how to best interact with Reddit to improve GEO? Oh, this is a great question.
Yeah, super important one here. And I think so Reddit is always almost always in the top three across every single LLM that we observe, certainly in the top five. So no matter what, plays an outsized role. What we've been hearing and seeing more recently is that uh, I think this is the area where every brand said, okay, I got to get in the conversation on Reddit. And perhaps more of that AI slop we talked about started to appear on Reddit.
Yep.
So it just goes back to that authoritative type of content that we talked about before, like actually participating in a conversation with real learnings, real findings, data that can support what you're saying. That's the type of stuff that is gets more highly valued by the models
Yeah.
versus just spamming on Reddit too. Again, you may see a short-term sort of uptick in citations,
Yep.
but more likely to get filtered out and not end up resulting in how the models actually are likely
Right.
to make a recommendation.
Yeah. One thing that, some of our clients have done is kind of going back to your point on influencers is enlist support from influencers. And by that I mean, not necessarily like the celebrity type influencers, but just champions of their brand that are inside their community who can advocate for them on places like Reddit. So that's kind of like a somewhat more organic way
Yeah.
to kind of cultivating brand influence on those types of channels where it is kind of
Yeah. And that's great because you get diversity of voice as well. It's not just all
exactly,
coming from your
exactly.
voice. Yeah.
Yep. Another question, and then we'll close things out. With some models rolling out paid ads, oh, this is great. This is a question I had wanted to ask. With some models rolling out paid ads, how does that play into this conversation?
Yeah, this is probably the usually you'd say the $1 million question, but I think
Yes.
this is probably the $1 trillion question, and a business model that certainly OpenAI and I imagine others are in Gemini as well, see as being incredibly important to the long-term health of their business. So ads have started to roll out on ChatGPT and some of the I believe it's AI mode, some of the Gemini suite as well. Uh, OpenAI is certainly getting the most press about it right now. So
Yep.
on that front, I think every brand would love to wants access to be able to serve paid ads. A couple of important pieces to note right now. So first, OpenAI has been very public about saying that paid ads will not influence the recommendations that they provide to brands. So going back to our earlier point of we're having very personal conversations with the LLM, at least I'll speak for myself. I don't want an advertiser to be able to influence the advice I'm getting on maybe some of the more personal elements of life.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
they've been very vocal about the safeguards they'll put in place for that. Um, but I think the ultimate the sort of name of the game is, or the understanding here is that uh, when you're within these models and you're having a conversation back and forth, the intent signals are often incredibly high, maybe more than any other uh, digital marketing channel has ever seen, even beyond a Facebook or anything like that, because you're so personal in saying, telling it things about yourself, asking it questions, and uh, and getting recommendations that you're trusting. So the opportunity for brands from a paid perspective is massive because at the root of it, every brand wants to be included from a GEO perspective. You want to be included in the organic prompt response. That's
Right.
the best thing that can happen to a brand because that's really where consumer trust exists. Uh,
Yep.
so that's the practice of GEO is incredibly important for that. If you are a brand who's not in that top consideration list, that's not getting recommended, paid ads becomes extremely important to your business
Mm,
because the moment is still incredibly high intent. Someone's trying to decide what mortgage provider to go with, or from a B2B perspective, maybe what CRM software to partner with. And if you're not getting organically recommended by the models, because the decision-making funnel has collapsed, and all can theoretically can now occur without ever having to leave the LLM. If you're not organically in the response, paid ads is your only option to get yourself back into the
right.
conversation. So the intent signal of how any of us day to day just interact with the LLMs is so incredibly high that ads, I think we all expect to play a massive role
Mm,
for established brands who want to sort of secure their position and challenger brands who might not be getting organically recommended in the prompt response, but need to find a way to insert themselves in the conversation.
yeah. Yeah. It will definitely be interesting to watch. I think there's a lot to think about with all of that. I guess just to close out the conversation, um, how would you recommend that brands future-proof their GEO strategies as the models continue to evolve? So, as they're offering more ad opportunities, as they continue to get smarter, as they potentially, use and rely on different information sources to feed their engines, like how can brands stay ahead of all of this, or at least keep pace with it because it's changing quickly?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, the first thing everyone should do is call your partners at V2 and ask how to get started.
Now that's
Uh,
perfect. We can end right there.
what I would just go back to, I think I've probably said it 3 or 4 times now on this call, but is the insights that you get from a GEO platform, they create a foundation and they create a map for then what you should be going out and doing from a content strategy. And what we've seen in our research, the models evolve over time. They start to
Yeah.
value certain sources, they start to devalue certain sources. ChatGPT went very heavy into commerce and has maybe scaled that back a little bit. So those things are going to continue to evolve. Having the insights, though, that are you're refreshing regularly over time, whether it's monthly or daily or whatever that preferred cadence is, without having that foundational layer and that map, it's going to be incredibly hard for any brand to know what decisions they should be making, what actions they should be taking. So I think we should all expect that the space is going to change. We all need to be thinking that we need to be nimble as a business.
Yep.
But the way to understand what those changes are and know how to adapt to it is by having those types of foundational insights and tracking it over time. Then you can quickly identify what those changes are so you can then react as a business.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, Taylor, I can't thank you enough. This was hugely helpful. A lot of great insights today. For folks listening in, I know there's a lot of questions. So if you do have questions that we didn't get to today, feel free to email me, and I'm more than happy to connect you directly with Taylor. But again, I hope everyone found this very useful. I feel like we could talk for the rest of the day. There's a lot here, but glad to have connected on this.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, everyone.